Hey guys, it's Ben here from the Strength Factory, and today I've got 5 on the bike training mistakes that you need to avoid. The first mistake I see people making is at the first hint of good weather, they go absolutely mental and just ride their faces off, which is relatable and it's fun, but if you don't tone it down a little bit, you've got to play that consistent game between now and the race or event, okay? Yes, ride loads, get the skills up, enjoy being outside and get some specific and smart training done. But what you don't want to do is burn yourself out training in the spring and be absolutely fit as a fiddle in May when your races are in June, July and August. So yes, ride loads, enjoy the drying trails and the sun, but start the training steady and then build it up. Training mistake number 2 is that when you start doing interval training, most people have too short a recovery or rest period in between the hard intervals. Okay, so a lot of people are going to be thinking, but that's what racing's like, you know, so you'll do maybe a 30-second on, 30-second off, or something like that, you know, 5, 6, 8 reps, okay, which is a very intense and demanding training session. But if you're doing that straight away, then all that happens is that you're repeating low power each time. Whereas if you do it the other way around and start with longer recovery, let's say you do 30 seconds hard, 60 or 90 seconds easy recovery, that way you actually develop your 30-second power, and then as you approach the race, you reduce the rest and recovery, and then you learn to repeat a higher amount of power. If you just go straight in now with the short recovery, then what you're doing is you are getting better at recovering and going again, but you're generally going to be repeating a lower power output, which is not what we want to do. So avoid those short recoveries early in your training, take longer recovery and then reduce it as you get closer to the event. The third thing that I see people getting wrong is they're spending too much time in the spring and summer on the turbo trainer, on Zwift and things like that in their garage, chasing things like higher FTP and things like that. And look, don't get me wrong, that's all good. You're doing something, you're working hard, and if the numbers are going up, it's going to help your performance. But what you've also got to remember is that time on the mountain bike is king, especially time on the race bike as you approach the actual race or event that you're doing. So yes, use a turbo trainer, use like Zwift and track your FTP and things like that, especially in those winter months. But as the weather improves and we get more daylight, try and get yourself outside more and more, and you're going to realize that it's on the bike training that's going to make the most difference, and trying to have that intensity away from the garage, away from the turbo, in a slightly more chaotic and technical environment that the trails give you. The next mistake isn't so much of a mistake, it's more of an omission really. People just don't think about it and they leave it out. And it's this general principle that you may have heard me talk about before, that as you approach a race or event, your training should become more specific for that race or event. So we do general training further out, typically in the winter months, and then we get more race specific training as we approach the event or the riding holiday or whatever it is. So what can you do then to get more specific training for the event? Well, replicating the event is a really great way to do it, or you know, doing intervals and training that replicates how you actually, you know, put out power and sprint and things in real life. So I have a session that I use with a lot of my guys in my online program that I call Fatigue Technical Skills, where you basically do some sort of sprint or effort into the top of a trail, so you're riding the trail whilst you're fatigued. It's really simple, but it's also very effective. I do also have a full video on this. I'm going to make sure I pop a link up the top there. It's about some race training sessions, okay? So not so much of a mistake, but most people are leaving this out, and for me this makes a really big difference, especially in the weeks, like last sort of month to 6 weeks in the run up to those races. This next training mistake is about basically your typical mountain biker on a typical ride does nearly the whole ride at like a medium intensity, okay? And so what you're missing there is that aerobic zone 2 work, okay, that lower intensity that builds your foundation of fitness, and those rides tend to miss the high intensity stuff. But there is some good news, okay, because look, we all love riding with our friends, and the group goes at the speed that the group goes. So the first thing is that, as I say to a lot of my clients, especially online, is that you can go and get some intervals and some intensity done on a group ride. Just after each trail, guess what, there's usually some fire road or whatever, or some sort of climb, and you can get it done there. And at first your mates might laugh a little bit at you, or they might take the piss because you're being all keen, but when you're just dropping them the whole time, who cares? So that's the first thing there. It's like, be smart, it's time efficient, integrate your training into those group rides. And the second one is a little harder to do in that environment, is trying to get those doses of zone 2 low level aerobic training. The great news is that with the longer days that are coming now as we come into the spring, is that you may be able to get that done before work, or in a lunch break, or in an evening, okay? There's a lot more opportunity to do it, okay? And whilst, yes, 2 or 3 hours is what you would ideally have, I don't have that normally, okay? But little regular doses, a couple of times a week, 45 minutes to an hour, doesn't sound like much, but add that up over the course of a month when you're consistent, and you're going to really find a benefit to your fitness and to your recovery if you're riding loads this summer. The final thing I'll say then is that a lot of people, they don't ride with anywhere near the intensity that they then try to race at. And there's always this balancing equation going on here that I talk about with my pros especially, where we've got a risk versus reward thing going on here, because the more you push, the more likely you are maybe to have a crash, and if you do crash, it might be a bit worse and you get injured, which sucks. So on the other hand though, is turning up at a race and trying to ride at 100% where you normally ride at 80 the whole time. There's a really big jump in your speed, in your effort, in the intensity, that means you're probably more likely to mess up your race and maybe crash and hurt yourself at the race. So you've got this big toss-up going on here for on-bike training. So what I would suggest is that in the run-up to that race season, is that there's going to be days where you feel good on the bike, okay? You know those days, oh, the tyres feel like they're gripping, I feel loose, my back feels good, whatever it is. On those days, at your own risk, disclaimer, they're the days that you push on a bit and really find that intensity, okay? Where you just push that bit closer, maybe 90% instead of your normal 80, or you ride with someone quicker and you just try and stay with them a bit longer than you would normally, and maybe take a little more risk so that you're used to riding at that higher intensity, because then when you get to the races, okay, then you're more used to riding at that high intensity. As I said, there's always a risk involved with that, but if you don't do that in preparation, then all it does is it moves the risk from now to race day, okay, where you either just ruin it and have a shit time and get a crap result, or you crash basically, okay, and nobody wants that. So have a think about adding that intensity, going a bit harder and a bit more committed in some of your training rides or fun rides, and I really think that's going to make a big difference when you get to the summer. There you go then. I think I said there's going to be 5 training mistakes, but I got carried away and there's actually a couple more, but it is what it is, and I really hope that at least 2 or 3 of those can be helpful to you to make a few tweaks to what you're doing. Remember, as always, if you've got any questions, drop them down below, give me a like and subscribe and all that nonsense, and I'll be back soon. Take it easy.